Dear viewers, my name is Benno Herz, and as the Acting Program Director, I would like to warmly welcome you to the living room of the Thomas Mann House here in Pacific Palisades. We are delighted to host a special conversation today titled Communicating Across Political Fault Lines, Reaching the Unreachable. We are grateful for our fellow, the computer scientist Andreas Nietzsche, and Martin Kaplan, Professor of Entertainment, Media and Society at the University of Southern California, to gather here today at the House for this timely discussion. In recent years, on both sides of the Atlantic, we have observed the rise of populism along with growing levels of polarization and radicalization. Democracies are challenged by disinformation, while social networks have reshaped the way in which public opinion forms. Democratic societies experience a lack of dialogue between parts of society. Andreas and Martin will discuss what can be done to revive dialogue between parts of society, taking differences and commonalities between Germany and the United States into account. Today's discussion will explore the nexus between quality journalism and the prospects of large-scale deliberation processes, and what possibilities there are for new communication strategies and their ethical implications. How can news media and the entertainment industry contribute to an informed society? We hope that today's conversation can provide us some ways to approach these topics, as well as insights and inspiration for further discussions. Let me just briefly introduce our guests today. Martin Kaplan holds the Norman Lear Chair in Entertainment, Media and Society at the USC Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism. He is the founding director of the school's Norman Lear Center, whose mission is to study and shape the impact of media and entertainment on society. His research interests include campaign coverage on local TV news, the effects of public health messages in entertainment, and the use of narrative arts to communicate science. Andreas Nietzsche is a German computer scientist with research interest in democratic self-organization. His work focuses on the opportunities and risks of technology for democracy, social cohesion, inclusion, and on conflict management. He is a board member of the Berlin-based Association for Interactive Democracy and co-founder of the Liquid Feedback Project, a software for large-scale online deliberation processes. We are happy that for the last 3 months, Andreas was also a 2022 fellow here at the Thomas Mann House in Los Angeles. I would also like to thank my colleagues Emilienne Lecko and Julia Welter for their help with preparing and organizing this event, as well as Boris Scharschmidt for filming and producing this video. I would like to thank the Norman Lear Center, as well as the Association for Interactive Democracy, for co-presenting today's conversation. Dear viewers, I hope you enjoy the program. Thank you very much for tuning in today.
Marty, it's my great pleasure to welcome here to the Thomas Mann House. We have met for the first time virtually, I believe roughly a year ago. And I've been here in California now for 3 months, and we've met at the Norman Lear Center. Now you're here at Thomas Mann House. Great pleasure, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. I'm glad we made contact and happy now that it's also non-virtual.
You have worked for the Commissioner of Education in the Carter administration, and also as chief speechwriter for Vice President Mondale. In 1984, you became deputy campaign chief of the presidential bid of Walter Mondale against the incumbent Ronald Reagan. Later on, you worked for the Disney Studios, and among other things, you wrote and executive directed The Distinguished Gentleman, a story on a con man becoming a congressman, starring Eddie Murphy. You now hold the Norman Lear Chair at the USC Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism, and you're the founding director of the Norman Lear Center. What is the mission of the Norman Lear Center?
It started with the idea that we live in an attention economy. With the explosion of information and data, the challenge is to grab and hold the attention of anybody. And that attention therefore becomes a scarce, valuable commodity which can be monetized. That affects pretty much every domain of human existence, because politics becomes a branch of holding attention, and journalism is about holding attention, and so is architecture, so are theme parks. And if you ask what word in the English language means holding attention, it's entertainment. So the Lear Center is about the way in which entertainment has conquered other domains and what the effect of that is. Because if grabbing attention is what your purpose is, then that has an impact on content. And so the way it affects content for good and for ill, and the way maybe we can use that, like the power of narrative to grab attention, if that can be a force for good, those are the concerns of the Lear Center.
Yeah. This already speaks to my initial reason to reach out to you. As you know, I'm part of the Liquid Feedback project, which is all about credible opinion formation and decision making for large-scale groups on the internet, for consultation of citizens, all the way to democratic self-governance of organizations. And we have come a long way with scaling up, and our work is never finished. We're continuing this work together with sociologists, political and social psychologists, AI researchers, researchers in computational social choice, and media science. When we do engagement or deliberation on political topics with citizens, we need somewhat knowledgeable participants, and not necessarily experts, because novices can be quite good in assessing expert opinions, but they need to be able to gather and process information. And this brings me back to the traditional media and their task. I mean, it also has to do with education, but also with traditional media. And I have this quote by former news anchor Walter Cronkite, who said, "I worry we are not getting enough of the news that we need to make informed judgments as citizens." Basically, I believe what he refers to is that we got a lot of interesting but unimportant information, for instance, on celebrity and crime.
So the news in the US is a business. Though the public sector has some investment in public interest news, it's tiny, and it's completely swamped by the commercially driven news enterprise. So if you are in the news business, which every journalist has to be, then you are a slave to attention. And how do you get attention? Well, the same way that when we were crawling along in the savannah, picking nuts and berries and fighting saber-toothed tigers, you capture attention with things like fear and danger and sex and novelty and color and fast motion and story above all. So the kinds of news that hold attention are advantaged when they do that. And so among Lear Center studies, we have looked at local television news, which is the #1 source of information for Americans, which if you don't know American local television, you might find interesting. It sounds like it's community and grassroots, whereas in fact, local television news, as you say, is driven by crime. And we've done content analyses of how much crime and what else after crime. And it's all in the area of either scary news or not really news. The kind of news, the kind of information Walter Cronkite was talking about, which is a familiarity with the things a citizen needs to know in order to be a good citizen, to understand what's happening in the world, that there is a world beyond your neighborhood, and that there are structures and institutions and norms which create a web that you're part of. That information on US television, local news, maybe is 3% of their time. So 3% is not competence, and it's buried and late in the shows. So where Americans get their information first is entertainment rich and information poor.
Yeah. I believe Walter Cronkite even said something along the lines that it's not just the right of the American people to know, but also their obligation to know what their government is doing in their name.
Yes, and Walter Cronkite remained so concerned about this that he let us at the Lear Center create an award in his name, the Walter Cronkite Award for Excellence in Television Political Journalism, because all these stations make their big money with advertising, and the kind of advertising that they run, which brings in more money than any other source of revenue to them, is political advertising. So you find yourself in the situation of, if you are living in some city, especially in a state that has primary elections, you are bombarded by advertising. There's not a single moment of available time to sell toothpaste during a campaign, because all the candidates have spent a fortune giving it to the stations to get their paid messages out. And yet those very stations don't cover in any journalistic way what's actually happening in the campaign. So people are left only to receive the paid message. Cronkite was worried about where that would leave us. And one thing that we try to do, besides research to demonstrate what actually is on the air and to do some work on what is the effect of that on audiences, is to reward the people who are doing a good job, to find best practices and who are doing a good job. And there are, and I'm always heartened, because when the nominations and submissions come in, it is so encouraging to see that in places all over the country, a tiny station in Montana was the station that broke the story in the last election about the way in which the U.S. Postal Service was being manipulated in order to suppress mail-in votes.
And it was a conservative station.
A conservative station owned by the Sinclair Group, which is quite comparable to Murdoch and other stations like that. And yet a reporter found this, she dug it out, she stuck with it. The story was picked up on national television, and it became a big discussion point of that election.
So she kind of contributed to closing the gap between what the public needs to know and what the public wants to know.
And she did it by being a great storyteller. Because in every neighborhood, she found, well, there was this box and they took it away. And people know what that means. And so telling the story in a way which is responsive to the identity of people in that community, but assuming that once you have their attention, you can make important things interesting.
But they're very interesting. And looking at the nominees, one logical choice for me was Dr. Gupta. Because even from my perspective in Europe, he was the guy who led us through the pandemics. In a way.
Thank you for doing such extensive research on our content.
So there's hope, obviously, for journalism, for quality journalism. I mean, the Walter Cronkite Award shows this.
As long as we have people to win the awards, there is hope. But it goes a little bit beyond that, because we have given awards to owners of stations and owners of chains to encourage them. And after a while, it became something that they wanted to compete in order to win. And if you own 15 stations, if the head office says to the stations, we want to win this, you're going to have to actually cover the content of campaigns. Then they do what they have to, and it improves the level of journalism, at least in those stations.
And once again, playfulness comes into the game. And I'm tempted to say that's the way it is.
Yes. Well, play is one of the things that captures our attention. The Dutch sociologist Huizinga said we are homo ludens, the creature who plays. One of my colleagues at USC, Walt Fisher, said we are homo narrans, the creatures who narrate and tell stories. And these are, I think, really perceptive. Sapiens, the scientific traditional term, is only about one aspect of who we are. And as we know from so much neuroscience now, the rationality that we display, I mean, Dan Kahneman talks about system 1 and system 2. Our rationality is retroactive. We do things on emotion and impulse, and then our bodies figure out a reason for us to make it seem like a choice.
Basically, we discovered the same in our liquid feedback project, where we really tried to create something absolutely rational, which we had to do because the content comes from the deliberators, and we don't know the content. So we cannot create stories. We can only try to create fairness, transparency. But we found out, even in this very rational setting, looking to address just the reflective system, just making people to try to actively allocate attention, people found ways for gamification. And we didn't add any gamification intentionally, but people were looking for ways to strive for influence and reputation, show off their achievements. And in the beginning, we were a little bit scared, and then we realized it's actually a good thing. It's naturally and it's human. So we even made this experience.
I read somewhere, I wish I could remember who said it. It was, I think, in an essay in the New York Times, that Twitter is the gamification of journalism and politics. That it is, by its very nature, the way in which, and I think it's true of Instagram as well, the way in which you interact with it is a game. And it also creates a market for explanations, so that whatever political tribe we belong to, there will be somewhere on Twitter things that support our position. And so we will play that game as though we were addicted to a slot machine and ignore the other casinos.
This was also the reason why in the last decades journalism has developed in a way that journalists are first about themselves, but then also about the acting politicians, much more so than about the actual issue. So if they are discussing a trade bill, they are not discussing the trade bill in its essence, but they are discussing what is in for the politicians standing for the trade bill. So they make it a game, and we don't get the information.
A game which is in turn a story. So when we talk about horse race coverage as opposed to issue coverage, it's that a horse race is a story. So here are the horses, and you can look at their teeth and what their diet is and who's riding them, and then who's ahead, who's behind, who's ahead, who's behind, and then there's a winner at the end. There is suspense, action, and excitement in that. There is not the necessity to understand anything. You don't have to understand, I mean, to push the analogy, the aerodynamics of the race course. You just need to understand who is pushing out whom. And so you're quite right. When we see issues covered, even in the direst of circumstances, It's about who is helped by this, who is hurt by this, what are the politics of it, who is afraid to talk about it, as opposed to the content itself. That is the nature of politics now, because politicians play to that. They know that if they give a policy speech, no one's going to pay attention. So they play to the emotion that the policy is meant to trigger.
But it has become a slippery slope.
I think we've fallen. I wish we were still somewhere on the slope, but if so, we're clinging by our fingertips.
Yeah. Talking about that, the American society is deeply divided, and maybe as a result of this perception of politics as being all about the politicians, themselves, a personal reputation, not so much about issues, not seeing them as servants of the people. And I believe in America, we even have a situation that the media diets are disjunct, or let's say the segregation is geographically along geographic boundaries, and also those people have different media diets. So and even lose the ability to talk with one another.
All that is true. I would add one villain to the narrative, and that is there are some politicians who are, evil might be too strong a word, but their sense of self-interest is entirely driven by power, and that right now the Republican Party for some years has been ruled with an iron fist. It's all about getting power, getting back in power, keeping power, and therefore rarely does any Republican ever venture to make a conversation, have an alliance with someone from a different party. In our case, since we mainly only have two viable parties. Yeah. And so that's driven, yes, by the source of information, but also driven by the enforcement of a kind of irrationality to hold their tribe together and make sure that it wins. You're right. Jim Bishop wrote a book some years ago called The Great Sort. That people have self-segregated into communities. And so California notoriously is one such community. I'm happy that it is. I can thrive here. But even in this state, if I drive 40 miles inland, I will find parts of California which resemble rural middle America. So it's also sorting within cosmopolitan centers to create little ideology deserts, as it were.
Yeah. Speaking about ideology, would you agree that this kind of segregation or tribalism that develops, or sectarianism maybe, is actually unideological, in the sense that it is not founded on any values which are underlying, like we had with the likes of Jeff Flake, John McCain, and now have a situation it's just us or them.
I think an analogy might be to football or soccer, in which it's the team is your loyalty. The team has no ideology. Its only ideology is that it's your team. Yeah. And it's about your place. And so it's about thumping your chest and being powerful, not about, well, we're the team that believes in X and Y. Yeah. And interestingly, when Colin Kaepernick, the football player, said he would kneel down during the national anthem to protest inequality, that was intolerable to the football team ownership, because it brought ideology into a realm which would threaten to divide the audience.
Yeah.
And no team owner, just like rarely would any entertainment studio want their product only to be consumed by a self-imposed portion of the audience.
So the resistance was basically business related.
Yes, yes. And so the business model drives everything else.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about Fox, for example, being a silo, which is impenetrable, and if you live in it, you have a different set of not just beliefs, but of what is true or not, or what is the nature of truth, that gives too much to the owners of that. Whereas in fact, Rupert Murdoch is a businessman.
Yeah.
And I mean, Axel Springer is a businessman. These people are doing what they do in order to gain market share. And they don't care if someone like Tucker Carlson is in effect endorsing violence and fascism from the podium because he gets the best numbers on the station.
Yeah, yeah. But with this, when people feel this tribe or this, it's becoming part of their identity, then it's absolutely impossible to argue with them. Because if it's on ideological grounds, I can still say, well, okay, you stand for honesty or
Personal
loyalty,
freedom
or loyalty, or on the other side, equality. But if you don't have this, if it's just us against them, there is no basis for a discussion.
Well, let me depress you more.
Yeah.
Because not only is that true, when you reach out, in addition to reaching out to values, one would think that facts play a role in reaching out. In communications theory, it's called the deficit theory, that people are lacking something, and it is the job of a good society to fill that lack with education, with news, and so on.
Yeah.
Whereas in fact, facts don't matter. Facts are ways of expressing your identity. So a classic example is climate change, in which some people are of the view that it's not real, it's a hoax, it's not caused by people, it's happened forever, and so on. When you try to reach those people, you think you are explaining something that they didn't know about. Whereas in fact, as Yale Law School's Dan Kahan points out, when you try to get people to agree with you about climate change by giving them facts, what you're actually doing is asking them to choose between what's true and who they are. Yeah. And that's a choice no one wants to make. And how do you get around that if the appeal to facts is not available?
Yeah.
And in my view, the way you get around it is you don't use facts, you use narratives.
Yeah. So this is a way then to overcome resistance to facts.
Yes, that if there is a better story than the one they believe, then that story can displace the one they have. For example, there are religious leaders who have embraced climate change mitigation as an important area because of the gospel of the earth, of protecting the nature that we have. When someone with that credential, when a woman like Catherine Hayhoe in Texas, a professor who was also from a family of religious figures, when she goes into her community and tells a story about climate change, people experience it not as, oh, I didn't know that fact, I didn't know that fact. The story is, here is one of us. Yeah. Here is someone who belongs to us. Look what she's saying. She is my sister, but I can't reject what she says because it's not consistent with journalism, I have to consider it because it's consistent with my story of who we are as a community.
Yeah, so as a credible person,
Yes.
Conveying the message.
Yes.
But are there ways to do this at scale?
Well, I have an example which may yet turn out to be that, and it's in the area of civic education. The U.S. had a long tradition of requiring some version of civics in secondary education. But for various reasons, that is no longer the case. You don't have to learn the basic rules and structures and norms of citizenship anymore. Somehow you're meant to pick them up from the news, God help you. And there was a time in the US when television, especially public television, had more standing than it does now. And on public television, there was a wonderful series called Schoolhouse Rock, which took the basic elements of what a high school civics course would be and turned them into rock and roll songs and cartoons. And one of the most famous, which anyone who was of the age to have seen that show when they were a kid, is How a Bill Becomes a Law. So explaining something quite dull with a song that all the kids are singing. Yeah. So that's gone away. And I've been part of an effort to say, can we do that again? What are the elements to bring civic education to young people who love entertainment, contemporary entertainment? Can it be done? And so we put together a team, and the team includes, and it's still operating, Kenya Barris, who is the producer and creator of shows like Blackish, which are right at the heart of confronting structural racism in comedy, which is something that Norman Lear pioneered in the 70s. So we put together him with a wonderful animator and producer named Chris Nee, who had the 2 top-rated shows on Disney children's programming. So she knows how to reach children with stories, and in her case, the most successful one was about a young girl who played doctor to her stuffed animals, and she did so because her mother is a doctor, and in fact, the mother is a black woman. And that show became popular, and as a consequence, more black women applied to medical school than ever before, showing the impact of modeling. Yeah. And so she had that experience, Kenya Barris had his experience, and then Barack and Michelle Obama got involved as executive producers. And for Netflix, they created a series called We the People, which is a dozen short films, each of them with phenomenally popular musicians and recording artists, and really bold, exciting, experimental, fun, playful animation. And the content is all about tax policy, for example. Yeah. You haven't lived until you've heard Lin-Manuel Miranda explain tax policy through song lyrics. Yeah. But this is what it is. And so that can be seen by millions of people, not just community by community. And so there's a hope that if something like that catches fire, then you can fulfill the promise of television, which in its early days, it's hard to believe this was true, was that it was an educational revolution.
Yeah. Maybe I have to share an example from Germany with you, where a high school student started to create YouTube videos on mathematics. And he always, in a song, he always explains a certain thing. And I share this with you. And went viral. Meanwhile, he's a university student.
Yes, exactly.
Pretty the same story.
Exactly. Find people where they already are rather than dragging them somewhere where you say, you must learn this. Instead, be who you are. You don't have to leave your tribe. And be entertained. Have your attention captivated in a positive, affirmative way. And that's one of the things that the Lear Center does that I'm most proud of. It is, how can we use entertainment not as a way to degrade and corrupt and misinform or distract, but rather as a source of inspiration and understanding, either of other people or of ideas and worlds that we're not familiar with. And so we work closely with the creative community in Hollywood and New York and elsewhere to help them learn how to tell stories about complicated things and not lose their audiences when they do it.
You want to make sure that, I mean, depending on the topic, but if, for instance, if you talk about health issues, you want to make sure that all the information is fact-checked?
Yes. Well, what we do is we connect writers, screenwriters. They ask us a question about something they're working on. We find the best experts for them to talk to. Not someone who's going to say, you did this right, you did this wrong, or artificial intelligence, which ranks or rates. Instead, we put them together and they have a conversation. And the doctor or clinician or scientist knows that what they're saying to the writer doesn't have to do. There's no contract between them. They don't have to promise to be accurate. The hope is that when they hear what's accurate, they will be tempted to make it true because it's always appealing to say based on a true story, or and so the writers and the producers and the networks get this for free, and so a show that has to pay a consultant to check the accuracy has friction. They requires money to, but if you don't have that budget, what if there's somebody, us, who will find those experts and put you together for free? And then maybe if you do a good job, we'll give you an award.
Brilliant.
Yes, exactly.
Brilliant idea. So as to the divide in America, what you're saying is basically because people cannot totally control the limbic system. That's a way you can actually reach them via the limbic system, whereas the reflective system is blocked.
Yes, and the limbic system, as you know, is the place where we receive stories. And it is so powerful that Plato, in the 10th book of the Republic, bans poets, because poets were the orators and entertainers and rock stars of 5th century BCE Greece. And Plato knew that when you are in the thrall of a Homeric epic, you are not in control. Your limbic system is taking you wherever that poet or orator wants you to go. And he said that reason is not enough to stop that. It is so powerful, he despaired of ever intervening, so the only thing that he could do was to banish. So what he didn't try is, okay, so there's one poet over here, but let's have another poet over here, and have other appeals to the limbic system, which appeal to what Lincoln called the better angels of our nature.
I also see potential for misuse, obviously.
Well, it's already being misused because all propaganda misuses that. It means the nature of that. So the question is what is already pernicious and toxic in our society, is there a way of using those tools in order to uplift and inspire and inform?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not implying the good guys should not use it, because the bad guys have used it for a long time.
It's black magic.
Yeah.
It is a force that if you are in control of, I mean, if you are a singer and you see what you can do with an arena full of people, it's a little scary to know that you have that power.
Yeah.
And so acknowledge that power exists, and then ask, what do you want to do with your power?
Yeah.
That's the question we ask writers. What do you want to do with your power? And to make them self-conscious about having that power and self-conscious about having that choice.
Do they know like an ethical rule book or higher purpose for journalism and content creator?
I think the goal of the entertainment business is to make money.
Yeah.
And so the rule book is making money. What number did you get?
Yeah.
But many, the majority, I would say, of the people in this creative community are what I would call intelligent, thoughtful, well-informed, and moral individuals.
Yeah.
So they are following the rule book that their parents and other influences in their peers have brought to them, and they're doing the best they can within the profession that they have chosen.
Yeah. You also worked with public health announcements?
Yes, one of the first grants that the Lear Center got when we were established in the year 2000 was from the Centers for Disease Control, because they understood that reaching Americans would be more effective if they were through stories than they were through, pamphlets and posters on the wall and traditional public education campaigns. And so we connected the clinicians and scientists and doctors at the CDC who cover more than 100 different topics. We connected them for free with the Hollywood creative community, so that two things would happen. One is we would put things on the radar screen of writers that they might not have been thinking otherwise. Topics that are real and important, but they were not focused on them. And then we also made available a mechanism for free to be accurate. They don't have to be accurate. These are not public entities. They can do what they want. And which artistic freedom is a very important principle of the First Amendment. And some writers will happily falsify things because in their point of view, everyone knows it's made up. It's fiction. These are actors and so on. But I think that's the minority. I think most writers understand that they wield amazing power and that people may know it's actors and scripts, but they forget it when they are caught up in a story. So we work with writers to inspire them to pay attention to things and to inspire them to be accurate. And public health is one of the most important areas in which we do this because its consequences are immediate. There was a show, one of the early examples of this was in a daytime, called soap operas, daytime television, 5 days a week, melodrama, continuing stories. And there was a story about a young couple about to get engaged, but the man learned that he was testing HIV positive because of a transfusion and needles and so on. And he had to decide whether to tell his fiancée because he was afraid she wouldn't want to marry him. And the ratings for the episode when he had to decide and tell his fiancée were through the roof. And what we did was we attached at the end of that episode on screen, if you want to know more about testing, call this number at the CDC. And so we were able to actually do an experiment to see what happens to that hotline when a TV show is telling a story about getting tested. And it spiked. It spiked higher than every other effort that year from the UN, from the World Health Organization, from the CDC itself, all based in spreading facts. That storyline was more successful in getting people to be interested in changing their behavior.
People sympathized
Exactly.
with it.
Exactly.
Character.
They identified with their emotions, their limbic systems were involved, and because of that, they were able to absorb into their value system, however cut off they were from other things. This inhabited them. These were friends in their minds of them. And so if their friends face this, then they could face it.
Yes, exactly. What comes to my mind is that I see some parallels with the Obama era nudging, where basically people were nudged into certain choices which the government thought would be in their best interest, in the best interest of the citizens. Do you think that it's fair to compare this, because this is also a way of, let's say, unconsciousness by choice design, making people do certain things?
Well, I think if you examine choices that citizens have, it's rarely without some kind of nudge. I mean, in Australia, if you don't vote, you have to pay a fine. So that's a straight out transparent mechanism. Here, if you don't vote, then you're not wearing a sticker saying I voted, and maybe it unleashes peer pressure, or it's possible to tell somebody on election day that their neighbors have voted. 50% of the people on your block have already voted.
Yeah.
This is information which is public.
Yeah.
We thought you might want to know that.
Yeah.
So that's another kind of nudge. Putting choices above or below is less explicit, but it's all part of the transaction of communication. I think what makes nudging unusual is that it became a pop culture term in sociology.
Yeah, I get it that you want to convey a good choice to somebody if you know this, if you're in that position of deciding this, and many people will actually welcome it.
Yes.
The question is, this is very short term. This is a one-time decision, one-off decision. So people are kind of dependent on continuously being nudged if they shall continue making good choices, rather than learning to have a good long-time strategy which they may adjust over time. So this is totally lost by nudging, if you go for this kind of policy.
I'm thinking about people who watch Fox News and all the time, and in airports and bars as well as at home. They are constantly being told what to think, what to do, and much of it is completely made up and often dangerous and anti-democratic. Those are nudges in a way.
Yeah.
They are short term, but people come back to them because they are addicted to their tribe's music. And that's where, and entertainment. That's where they go to get it. Outrage is a form of entertainment. And every day their outrage can be fueled so that there's never a lack of nudging. The question is there an equivalent which can be longer lasting, which doesn't depend on a single dose to inoculate you, but rather depends on a worldview, a culture in which being aware of what's happening in the world is considered a good thing for your tribe.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Exactly this, yes. And we still have to discover this,
Yes.
I guess. Yeah. You just mentioned Fox News. There is this split in the media diet in the US. When did this actually happen that people don't share information sources anymore?
It happened early on in Fox's beginnings. Their motto, which was a brilliant choice on, I think it was Roger Ailes' part, was fair and balanced. And the idea was that balance was what was missing in the news, that all those other stations were just feeding you one side. But Fox didn't feed that side and the other side. They only fed the other side to make, on a kind of gross level, a balance in the entire information ecosphere. And people didn't care. They were happy to get a point of view which gave them permission to believe things which were not true, but made them able to be angry at things together. It created a permission for bad behavior.
The comfortable situation of not being challenged in your views?
Not only not being challenged, but being offered views which are completely false.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. There's a market for rationalizations, and Fox won the competition to be that market. So you can always turn to Fox, and now there's a range of websites, because this preceded the internet, that do a similar thing.
Yeah, and this is a very complicated and dangerous situation for the US.
Yes,
obviously.
yes.
Luckily, when I compare this to Germany, we don't have this situation, I would conclude.
You have more diversity.
Yeah. Also, the majority of Germans, be they from, Christian Democrat to socialist, rely on the same or overlapping sources of information with this big public sector seen as a trustworthy institution and a good source of information. And in the United States, we have National Public Radio, which does an excellent job, I can tell, on the radio at least. They are present and they are syndicated by local stations. So on the local level, you have not on the local level, you have everywhere in the United States, you have good coverage of news on the radio, if you so wish. But on television, this is different.
And the numbers that the radio does tend to be older and smaller. And
so is television.
Some television. Fox does skew older.
Okay.
Facebook skews older.
Yeah.
So TikTok is the future of democracy, apparently. God help us. But you were talking about an overlap of facts in German news sources.
Yeah.
Not only do we not have an overlap in information, but we also have no agreement on what constitutes truth or evidence or proof. It's often called an epistemic crisis. There used to be a view that, well, if you want to check if something is true, you can check it. But now that whole process of fact-checking has been tainted by ideology. So that if the Washington Post is fact-checking Donald Trump for lying, something like 20,000 times, it's easy to say they're a liberal paper.
Yes.
They're against us.
Yeah.
As opposed to saying, let's see what they said about these facts.
Yeah.
And what are our common standards of accuracy?
Yeah.
We don't have that anymore.
Yeah.
What we have instead is what are the badges of identity of membership in our tribe. And if you belong to our tribe, or you are the feeders of our tribe, like Fox News, then you deserve to be trusted. Not, I have the methods and the tools and the education and the experience to be able to make my way through a crowded marketplace of people competing for my belief.
Yeah. Well, we have no absence of conflict, obviously, in Germany, and it's not always that we agree really on the same facts, and especially we have no consensus on political grounds. So we look at often the same facts, assess them differently, have different responses to them, and sometimes we don't see the same facts. This happens.
And that's appropriate.
Yeah.
That's appropriate because we have learned that how you frame a question can affect what you think is factual or relevant or not. And you know, sociologists have proven that these categories of absolute truth are constructions, social constructions. But even so, it has not gone all the way to nihilism, to saying nothing matters. Facts don't matter.
Exactly. At least for the overwhelming majority of the population, and we have our share of people who follow conspiracy theories.
And one expects that. I mean, there always was a certain percentage in any poll who would believe the most ridiculous stuff. And if your poll didn't reveal that 15%, it wasn't a reliable poll because those people are there. But when that number becomes in the 40s or a majority, then that's kind of scary.
Yeah. Let me get back very much in time. The first time I encountered your work was in 1984. Walter Mondale. In a television interview, he said something along the lines of, "My opponent won't tell you, but I tell you, we will have to raise taxes in order to confront the deficit." And by saying that, he sent what biologists and sociologists would call a costly signal. When I saw this on television, I thought, I received exactly that signal, and I thought, this guy is authentic and determined, and I also thought, he's gonna make it. I was wrong on the last one. So he lost big time, and this costly signal didn't play out for him. I still wonder, after all that time and with all the experience we have gathered over time, if it's really a bad strategy to convey the truth if it contains an inconvenient message.
Well, I think authenticity, the word you used, is the key to this. The perception that someone is authentic is gold in politics. And even someone like Donald Trump, without telling the truth, in fact, by telling lies, by being an authentic liar, gains people's respect. We know what he is. You know, I've got his number, but you know, we could use that. Let's put someone like that up against Putin, someone that might even be crazy. And we want someone like that for us. So authenticity can be scary too. But to your point, I well remember that. The occasion, which you probably saw, was the Democratic National Convention, the nominating convention. It was the last night of the convention in 1984, and there was Mondale accepting the nomination of his party. And then he gets to a point which no one knew was coming. And he was talking about the deficit, how the deficit will crush our economy and what we have to do about it. And then he said this, Mr. Reagan will raise taxes and so will I. He won't tell you, I just did. And at that moment, there are 30,000 people in the room. I could feel everybody's breath suck in. And you could count 1, 2, and then a roar of approval because they thought what you thought.
Yeah.
Here is an honest man.
Yeah.
We are nominating an honest man who will tell us the truth, even if it's hard. And in fact, our polling showed a huge surge in support, and it lasted for many days. And it was only because Reagan and his team figured out a way to counter that. And it lost the element that Mondale added after that famous words, which were, he will raise taxes on working people, I will raise taxes on the millionaires who are not paying their fair share. And so, but what Reagan got to communicate was he just wants to tax the poor working Joe. So yes, authenticity is something to reach for, and yes, it can win in the short term, and it can bite you, as you saw. You used the expression "an inconvenient truth." Al Gore, of course, his movie about climate change had that title. And, the record of that is that people made fun of him. George H.W. Bush, who ran against him, George W. Bush for president, called him Ozone Gore. Because it was silly to worry about these things. And yet, the world has come round, and even in the U.S. and even among people who thought it was a hoax, there is a view that we are living through a terrible disaster and have to pay attention to it. So sometimes facts catch up with the truth.
So my last question, how optimistic can we be about the future?
Well, I think of it this way. You have a choice. If you are pessimistic and things turn out badly, well, it's what you thought. If you are pessimistic and things turn out well, then you wasted all that time. If you are optimistic and things turn out well, great. If you are optimistic and they don't turn out well, so it goes. What is the price on the matrix table of each of those choices? I think the higher price is paid by the pessimists than the optimists. Doesn't mean the optimists will be right, but at least of the potential outcomes, you have a better odds if you are optimistic.
They may be wrong with the same likelihood, but the optimist will be much happier.
Yes.
Meanwhile.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Marty, thank you so much.
My
As
great
always,
pleasure.
it was very enlightening. And yeah, thank you so much for coming here.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to continuing our conversation.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to Thomas Mann House.
Yeah, you're welcome.